Hello, and welcome to this episode of The Life of Purpose as we continue our journey on the Stations of the Cross. And today we are picking up where we left off last time. Last time we were in the garden and Judas has come in and betrayed Jesus. And now we're picking up where that would take us, which is at that point they put Jesus in shackles, more than likely, chains, and they started the journey out of the garden and back down the winding path, the same path that Jesus rode down on the donkey on Palm Sunday, down across the Kidron Valley. But instead of making the turning and heading up toward the eastern gate of the temple that he did as he did on Palm Sunday, this time they take him across the Kidron Valley and up by a different road that would lead to a set of stairs. And those stairs would take him directly into the compound of the high priest. It is the home of Caiaphas, who was the high priest, and it takes him there where he is immediately placed under the house in a holding cell. You have to remember the high priest served in Jewish law would serve not only as the high priest overseeing all of the religious life of the people of Israel, but he also served along with the Sanhedrin, the Jewish high council. They worked together as the legal authority. With Pharisees, Sadducees, the high priest, the chief priest. They would be the legal entity that if someone is violating God's word or God's law, then they would have the right to try them, to convict them, and to issue a sentence. And so there was a jail cell underneath that he would be placed in until the Sanhedrin could be assembled to actually try him.
And the Romans wanted the people of Israel to do this.
Absolutely.
Because they wanted to stay out of their
Right.
religious squabbles, because the Romans, they couldn't understand what the religious squabbles were about.
No.
And so they gave a lot of power to the Sanhedrin to oversee the temple and their religion. And so they had a lot of power to enforce laws and to impose different punishments. And so this is where it starts, is Jesus has violated the law of the people of Israel, and this group is going to try and convict him and bring out what those violations are.
Right. I mean, of course, they have to bring in false witnesses because Jesus never broke the law. He said, I didn't come to abolish the law, but I came to fulfill the law. And he had moments where he was trying to emphasize what the law really was about, especially Sabbath law, that the Sabbath was for people, and the people weren't for the Sabbath. It was supposed to be a blessing and not a curse to us. And so he would try to live into the true nature or the spirit of Sabbath law. But here they're upset with him because he has said things, or people have said things about him. And so they are ready to do away with him. His following is growing, and he is, well, they're wanting to know if he claims to be Messiah. Do you claim to be the anointed one of God? And do you claim to be related, connected to God? And so this process of bringing in false witnesses to testify against him and of actually trying him, it's all within their rights as the leadership of the Jewish people, but they don't really understand what they're doing.
Yeah, and Jesus has sort of skirted this question publicly. His favorite word to refer to himself in the Gospels is the Son of Man, which comes out of Daniel, and it's kind of a messianic figure, but it's not like the primary one.
Right.
And so that didn't really raise enough question to really get everybody excited when he would say that. Now, there were times, like when they were at Caesarea Philippi, where Peter makes that confession, and Jesus says, yeah, you're right. I am the Messiah. But that word is one that Jesus rarely, if ever, used publicly. But now they're wanting to make Jesus say it. They're wanting him to cross that line, and so the whole thing is geared to making him make that claim that he is the Son of God, he is the Messiah.
Right. And imagine, it's really impossible to, but try to imagine that you are Jesus in this moment. You're praying peacefully, well, not peacefully, you're praying in anguish in a garden, and suddenly a friend has betrayed you, and now you have been taken in shackles to the high priest, you've been placed underneath his house in a holding cell, and then, much like the psalmist says, out of the pit they drew me up, you get to this point where the way you raise someone up into the presence of Caiaphas the high priest and the Sanhedrin was that you would have them cross their arms in the shape of an X, and you would tie their wrists together, and then they truly would put either a hook between that, or they would wrap another rope and tie it, and then throw the rope up through the hole. And they truly would, the guards of the high priest would pull you up through an opening in the floor, just large enough for you to come up, be brought up. And they would bring you up and sit you down on your knees in front of the high priest and the Sanhedrin. And so, I mean, it's meant to be an intimidation. Of course, we know that the intimidation doesn't really work with Jesus.
Yeah,
he's not really intimidated by these people. And so as they ask him questions and as they accuse him, he chooses at times not to even speak. They have him slapped. They spit on him. They mock him. And yet he doesn't retaliate. They're trying to provoke him.
And he'll say, well, you said it. I mean,
right.
Yeah. And so
you say that I am. You say that I am. And finally, he admits that he is this one that Israel's been waiting for. And in that moment, it says that the high priest began to rend his garments, orders Jesus to be silent, begins to tear his clothes, there's chaos that erupts from that, because in their minds, he is blaspheming, and in their minds, he is claiming something that he has no right to. I mean, this is Mary and Joseph's kid from Nazareth, and yet here he is claiming that he's the one that Israel's been longing for centuries and centuries. They have been waiting for Messiah, and he's the one.
And in Luke, the thing that pushes it over the side that really makes him angry is he says, you say that I am. Now, that in English doesn't really capture what's going on.
No.
Because the Greek word for I am is ego eimi. Mm-hmm. And, of course, we're familiar that the I am statements in John, but it's the translation back into Hebrew would have been Yahweh.
Right.
And he looks at the high priest and says, you say I'm Yahweh. Mm-hmm. Which, at that point, they absolutely lose it.
That's right.
Because now he's saying they claim
right.
that he is.
Yeah. And so they have no recourse but to condemn him, which is the third station on the stations of the cross, is that Jesus is condemned. He's condemned by the people that he comes to. You remember, John talks about that in the prologue to his gospel, that he comes to them, but they do not receive him. Mm-hmm. And so here he has come to the Jewish people, the people of Israel, God's chosen people, and yet here their leaders, the highest ranking, the most devout, reject him and condemn him. But of course, they can't kill him in the way that they want to.
Right.
It's Passover, and so even though they condemn him, they want the blood on someone else's hands.
Yeah, and they really didn't have the capacity for a death sentence.
No.
And that's really what they wanted. And so the move then is to get him out of the Jewish court, as it were, and get it to Pilate. And so we kind of see that movement as Jesus is there, and as they're having this trial, people start accumulating there around Caiaphas' house, and one of them is Peter.
Right. And some people believe that Peter may have followed when Jesus leaves the garden, is being taken there, that Peter sends James and John back across the top of the Mount of Olives, back to the village of Bethany where they were staying, near or with Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. And that Peter follows because he's the leader of the disciples. He's going with to see where his master is taken. And he goes to the gate. And there's a person at the gate who thinks they recognize him and ask if he is part of them. And he says, no, he's not part of those disciples of Jesus. And then another says, I think you're a Galilean. I can hear it in your voice. You've got to know this
You've
guy.
got that Southern accent.
That's right. You can't deny it. And he says, I know. I've never met the man. And then while he's warming himself by the fire, it's another who asks, and you've got to be one of his disciples. I think I remember seeing you with him at the temple. I think I saw you walking through the marketplace. I heard you talking about him. No, I don't know him. I mean, the fourth station of the cross is Jesus is denied. And it's not that the Sanhedrin deny Jesus. They definitely deny who Jesus is. They deny that Jesus is Messiah, even though we know he is. They deny that he is the Son of God, though we know he is. But the fourth station, Jesus is denied. Again, it's somebody who knows Jesus better than anyone. I mean, Peter is lead-off batter of Peter, James, and John. Yes, there are those moments when all the disciples are together. But then there's those moments when it's Peter, James, and John. Jesus takes Peter, James, and John and goes up on the Mount of Transfiguration. Peter was there when the cloud comes and covers him after he is transfigured, and Peter has witnessed his holy look of glistening white and glowing and all that. And when the cloud covers, Peter's heard the voice of God say, "This is my son, whom I'm well pleased. Listen to him." And here's Peter denying that he even knows who Jesus is.
And Luke, and I believe another one of the Gospels, says that at that moment, his eyes lock with Jesus' eyes. And he hears the cock crow. And it's just one of those crushing moments, both for Jesus and for Peter, to realize what has been done here.
Right.
And it's would have to have been crushing for Peter to realize, goodness, what did I just do? At the same time, he's terrified because, they're going to drag him and throw him in the pit next.
Right.
And so he's trying to figure out what to do. And interestingly, 5 hours earlier, they were falling asleep up in the most peaceful garden. And now all of a sudden, everybody's life is endangered.
Well, and you remember probably 4 or 5 hours earlier before the garden, when they were sitting at the table. And Jesus says, one of you will betray me. And everyone's saying, is it I, and all of that. And there's a moment at the table when Peter says, I will never betray you, Lord. And Jesus looked at Peter and said, I tell you that before the rooster crows in the morning, you'll deny even knowing me 3 times. You have to wonder, when the third time hit, and he looks through the crowd that's gathered in the courtyard of the high priest, and he looks through the opening in the window, and maybe through the shoulders of the Sanhedrin that are standing there, and he sees Jesus, who has been slapped and beaten and spat on, and Jesus looks at him square in the eye. You have to wonder in that moment, does he remember what Jesus said at the table? And when he hears the rooster crow, does he wonder, how do I come back from this? What do I do next? I have denied knowing him. In his own way, he's betrayed him. And what do I do next?
It would be one of the hardest moments in Peter's life, and one that we'll see played out in the Gospels as the story continues.
Absolutely.